In conversation with Cassie Shars, after teaching Shakespeare and Questorics at the University of Montana for many years, Cassie Shars commute between Missoula and Palm Springs, California. Most recently, his memoir Undetectable has come out from Running White Press in 2024, adding his work across genres. He has published two novels, a nonfiction account of the Sharon Kowalski case, a poetry collection, and book of essays on law and fame. His writing draws on his experience as an activist, attorney, and outdoorsman. Find out more about Kasisha's writing at www.cassisharks.com. And on today's episode of Auto Interview, it's my utmost pleasure and joy to have on the show today, Cassie Shars. How are you doing, Cassie?
Fine. Okay. But yeah,
Cassie, I want to say that mere reading the description page of your book, Undetectable, sounds quite cooling, emotional, and sad for me. And I would like to ask you, why did you decide to write this striking story about your life?
I think, yeah, I saw that question and I didn't really know how to answer it. Because I'm not a great memoir fan. I'm more of a novelist and a poet.
Mm,
And when I was in the university, I was writing essays. Um, but a friend of mine, Azita Asanlu, who's Iranian, but she lives in the United States, a good friend, she said, like, you need to tell your story. You tell your, you have had HIV for a really long time, and you've been really successful and with your career, and people need to hear about surviving with HIV rather than the horrible stories that came out of the 80s.
mm,
We had so many people dying all the time, and those moving memoirs about pain and suffering. And a lot of this is about pain and suffering, but
yeah.
it's also, but my take, or not my take, but my story is about surviving with it, with the virus. And so she convinced me to write, and I originally, it was an ethno memoir. So I did all these interviews of other people in the United States with HIV, and then I went to Kenya, interviewed people in the slums, and then I went to Mumbai, interviewed survivors in India, and I intertwined all their stories with my
Mm,
story. And
mm,
then my publisher looked at it and said, "Well, wait a minute, we really want your story. Stop hiding behind these other people and and
mm,
tell your own story." So that cut was very daunting for me because I don't like to talk about myself that much. But obviously, she thought I should. And there are some other stories in the memoir still.
yeah.
Um, I I do talk about my trip to Kenya. Um, so that's how it came about. So I ended up uh, not using a lot of the interviews that I had. I have they appear in another book, that have book of essays on HIV, sexuality, and later life. Um, but yeah, so that's it. It became my story, and it's there it is. And yeah.
Yeah, as we were speaking, I was taking some notes actually, and your answer to that want to make me to ask you another question that just came to my mind. I know there's a particular feeling that comes with publishing memoir, that comes with publishing real life stories. I'd love to ask you, how do you feel after getting all of this story about yourself out in publication? How do you feel within you? How does it make you feel? Would you like to talk about that?
Well, it makes me feel naked. I mean, to
I
be
wasn't
honest with you.
expecting that actually.
But yeah, no, it exposed, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
So because the book is kind of brutally honest, both emotionally, sexually,
yeah,
family wise, all of that stuff. I just didn't know there were no holds barred. I just went for it, and because I think if you're going to do a memoir, you better jump in and
yeah,
not try to beat around the bush, so to speak.
yeah.
So yeah, rereading the book, I kind of feel like, oh wow, this is like, whew, I don't want to read this,
Yeah.
but because it is so intimate and so serious and emotional for me. Um,
Mm.
but maybe that's what memoir has to do to be effective. You really need to. I mean, you can do it in poetry if you're confessional, of course, and um, but there's something raw about a memoir. You're right, and it's a little bit scary.
Yeah. Well, I love your take on that. I love the fact that I wasn't expecting you're going to mention naked because I've had too many people tell me that, after writing memoir, I felt so naked. I need someone to give me clothes to cover my nakedness. And I'll be like, oh, that's quite, yeah. So it's to hear that from you too shows how, exposed one can feel afterward once you have a story out there because you feel like so many people are reading your story and you don't know a bit about those who are even reading. You know,
Yeah,
reading it.
yeah,
You don't know anything about their own life, but they are reading your
yeah,
life story. But then also they are learning in the process. So that's quite lovely to know, really.
yeah,
Thank you for
yeah.
mentioning. And now, just in
Mhm.
case, for readers who haven't read Undictable yet, and without giving much information away, could we have a sneak of what we'd expect in terms of themes picking up the book?
Well, the book, the introduction sets its goal, a kind of question of why people want to survive in the face
Mm,
of um, a lethal disease like HIV was when I got it. And um, I really the book wants to talk about how to survive obstacles.
mm,
So, and it's about resilience, it's about survivorship, but it's also about dispelling all the myths that attach to that, whether it be faith or drugs or whatever. My feeling is that you just have to face it and uh, continue and keep on keeping on, so to speak, to survive.
mm,
Not get involved in, faith healing and all these kinds of ideas that are somehow, you know, about fate, about things outside of yourself that are the
mm,
cause of it, all of that stuff. Um, so my book is really about, going through the difficulty and living with it and not relinquishing the trouble, but just dealing with it and overcoming it in a kind of existential way, in a kind of like not trying to sugarcoat it in any possible way.
yeah. Yeah. That's great, Casey. Thank you. That's quite great. Thank you for mentioning. And now there's this question I'd love to ask you. What have you learned from your experience of HIV? Also, what do you wish readers, to take away or garner from reading your story? Would you like to talk about that too?
Well, I'm not sure. I guess I think there are a couple of things I learned from getting HIV because I come from a relatively privileged country and a privileged status within
Yeah.
that country, and here I was all of a sudden thrown into support groups with drug users, with people people of all different walks of life, which I
Yeah.
normally wouldn't associate, or I wouldn't necessarily be seeing all the time. So I was kind of
Mm,
thrown into the kind of real life that exists around me, and I really learned, and I was also thrown into some political activism around around the AIDS epidemic and getting resources from the government. So, and I joined
mm,
ACT UP, and so I had a political awakening. Um, and I think not that HIV made me a more aware person. Um, it made me more of a common man kind of thing,
mm,
if you want to say that. So, and then also I was able to meet and talk to a lot of people that I wouldn't have talked to without it.
yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, what people need to take away, maybe, I'm not sure what they need to take away basically that HIV is a horrible disease, but people have it and they live with it and they survive with it. And
Mm,
I think that's really important in people places like Kenya because there I was only really able to talk to women. I talked to a couple of guys, but
Mm.
mostly because there's such a stigma. I don't know if in Nigeria that's the case, but definitely in Kenya, which has a very high incidence of HIV. Um,
Wow.
yeah, men will not, they don't want to even talk about it because it's associated with being gay. So,
Oh.
yeah, so it's very difficult to get guys to open up about being HIV positive. But I wanted to kind of open up that whole field and say, well, you can
Conversation.
still be a human being and you can still make friends, you can still love and live and be a success in the world with HIV. So that's kind of what I'm hoping to get out of the book, have it be, you know, demystify some of the
Mm.
stigma.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. And I can actually go on and on, but I don't know. I don't want to take much of our time because I know that there's a sort of stigma that is associated with people living with HIV and AIDS that make them to kind of hide in closet, feel too much depressed for their life to even think of what future waits for them. And sometimes they are very, they kind of hide themselves really. They don't really talk about it. And they feel
Yeah.
this stigma, this shame. And when people talk about these things in their environment, they kind of want to shy away from it. That most people even kind of even stop going for hospital treatment because of the stigma attached to it. Yeah, so it happens. Yeah. I read an article in Time Past about this, and I was like, oh, really? That's quite bad, really.
Hmm.
That's quite what creating awareness for, I love to say.
Yeah, yeah. It creates awareness, and of course, my book is very much about being out in HIV. And even in America, of course, people are still. Even, I live in Montana, which is like a kind of rural state, and people still don't want to talk about HIV at all.
Mm.
So the book does the work of saying, well, it's okay. It's okay to think about and talk about it and be HIV positive. And um, yeah, so I don't know.
Yeah. Thank you for mentioning. Thank you for sharing. Now, you also have a book in the name of The Trials of Christopher Mann. Could you
Yeah.
tell us about the making of that as well?
Well, that was the first novel I wrote. And
Oh,
yeah, so well, I was a Shakespeare teacher. And so I had to write essays. You know, if you're a literature faculty member, you have to write essays on Shakespeare. So I wrote essays on
yeah,
Shakespeare sonnets. And then after I got tenure and towards the later of my career, I said, well, I'll try to write. I'll write some poetry, I'll write a novel. And because I'm a lawyer, or I'm licensed in California, a lot of my work has to do with trials. I taught a course in
mm,
trial literature, and so I got involved in thinking about the assassination of Harvey Milk and George Moscone in San Francisco in 1979, which was a famous event.
yeah,
Uh, and so I took that trial and told the story of law students in San Francisco at the time that trial was taking place. And the
mm,
law students are kind of loosely based on my study group in law school. And so the book kind of arose out of this kind of historical context. My books tend to be interested in history because I like thinking about historical events and putting a backdrop, putting my novels against the backdrop of a real event.
mm,
Yeah, so that was kind of the law school novel. And it's about a closeted man in law school, and of course I was closeted in law school too. So
mm,
who has his partners are all heterosexual, and he's kind of struggling with that, but they're also in law school together, and um, he gets involved with one of the guys that has a girlfriend, and it's kind of a melodrama.
yeah,
uh, it's like one of those stories of college stories. But yeah, on the other hand, it has a kind of uh, mirror image to because one of the people gets really, when they find out that the two guys are having an affair, one of the other people gets really angry and
Oh, wow.
Um, I don't want to tell you what happens, but that was my
Well,
first novel. Yeah.
oh, that's
Uh-huh.
quite nice to know. And I love your fun way of talking about it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so you got to read it to find out what happens. But I also have, the students end up having to go to the trial of Dan White, which was the
Mm.
famous Twinkie defense. He got off from the murder because he ate too many sweets,
Oh.
including Twinkies and stuff. And so there's a so-called Twinkie defense. So they go to the trial, the real trial, as part of the story.
Mm.
Yeah. So, and then my other novel too is based on a real event in 1955 in Boise, Idaho, which was a surrounding a kind of sex scandal that took place in the park when a lot of bank executives and other elders were paying for sex with teenage boys in
Oh.
the park in 1955 in Idaho. And
Wow.
crazy, I know. Because Idaho's very conservative. I'm in Montana, but Idaho's as conservative as Montana, um, because America has, of course, a resurgence of conservatism, as you know. And the Western states tend to, except for California, Oregon, and Washington, which are very
Mm.
progressive. The Western states tend to be uh, very, very conservative, and so for this event to take place there, caught my imagination, and I set
Wow.
my second book, to the backdrop of that scandal.
Mm. Well, that's quite an
Yeah,
amazing one to write about.
yeah, yeah,
That's a great way to even get an inspiration for a book.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's great. Thank you for mentioning. Now, Casey, would you like to tell us about your career as an LGBTQ right activist and how it influenced your writing career?
Um, it turns out that I was a professor. I had started really started teaching gay and lesbian literature at the University
Oh,
of Montana, which had not taken place. This is in the mid 90s. So, uh, I mean, it was kind of a new field, believe it or not, at that point. And so, uh, I gave a course in that material and got interested in creating a center here. I'm sure Lagos has gay and lesbian community centers. We started a community center, um, and I just got involved in a lot of the legal stuff around gay and lesbian rights.
mm,
And with my partner, I was a plaintiff in the case for civil unions back before they were legalized. I don't know if marriages. I got involved in all of that, and that kind of led to my first book, which was about a woman who was severely disabled in an auto accident and a kind of custody battle between her parents
mm,
and her lover, her female lover. That's the Sharon Kowalski case book, which is also about law and about same-sex relations. So that kind of became my thematic with most of my writing.
mm.
So that book, and then the novels are all about that as well, and the memoir, to a certain extent, is
Yeah.
about that. It's about the connection between, HIV and gay love. But the thing is, of course, when I came to Africa, and even,
Yeah.
well, to a lesser extent to India, um, though, in Mumbai, a lot of the young men in Mumbai are, they are destined to marry because family is so crucial um, in Indian culture. So even though
Mm,
they're out gay and on the down low, they're living at home and their parents are waiting for them to get married. And
mm,
often, many of them are often married. And which also goes to the point in Africa that most of HIV, a lot of HIV is heterosexually transmitted, as you probably know. So women are, there are a lot of HIV positive women in Kenya,
mm.
and more so than in the United States. So you kind of learned from that HIV is not just the gay disease, right? It's a disease, especially in Africa.
Mm.
So that really opened my eyes to to the degree to which HIV is pervasive throughout the entire community. So, yeah, so my activism has been it kind of opened my eyes, but it's also driven most of my writing, even my poetry um, deals with that.
Wow. Wow, this is quite interesting, really. I love your take on this. I love your
Hmm.
answers to these questions too. Thank you for sharing. Thank
Yeah.
you. And now, apart from Undetectable, The Trials of Christopher Mann, and The Monkey Cages, do you have any other works you've authored or say currently working on?
Well, I'm currently working on a third novel, believe it or
Wow.
not, which I'm trying to. You probably know about this, but you're a poet, so. But you probably have to cut down your poems, and if you want to, there's this whole thing of editing to so I have like 140,000 words, and my most
Wow.
publishers it's very difficult to get published, but they all want 100,000 unless you're Stephen King or you're somebody famous. You really have to have a word limit because these
Yeah.
publishers don't, and so I'm in the throes of uh, trying to cut down this novel about immigration in the 19th century. Because my story is about a Polish immigrant that comes to the United States. And because
Mm,
immigration is such a huge issue right now in the
yeah.
US, everywhere, I thought, well, I'll go back to the 19th century and see what it was like for an immigrant to come over in 1882 and have what I'm not really comparing it to right now, but I wanted the story to show that most of us were immigrants at some time in our life, right?
Mm,
Not you, of course, but um, you know, most Americans, came over on boats from, Europe and from elsewhere, from Africa,
yeah.
so and now everyone wants to keep people away from the borders, but they don't. They were at one point crossing the border too, probably
Yeah.
illegally, right? So that's my story on the new novel.
That's
Um,
great.
yeah,
It's
so I'm working on
nice.
that.
Yeah, it's nice exploring on the theme of immigration next time around.
Yeah, yeah, it's a huge issue. I don't know. No, I don't know if Nigerians are leaving their country though, are they? I mean,
Not really. Now,
mhm.
Casey, could you tell us what publishing is like for a published author like yourself? Are there any challenges you've encountered in the process of writing your books and also ever since it got published?
Yeah, I think that I've never had an agent, so I've tried to get an agent. And of course, I started out with academic publishing, which is a little bit different.
Yeah,
Um, and then when I started doing fiction and poetry, I had to get out there and submit to agents and to publishers that accept. I
yeah,
mean, if you do some work on Google, you can find publishers that will accept manuscripts from writers without the need for an agent. And so I've done a
yeah,
lot of work. That's why both my novels have found publishers by my own submission of my own manuscript. So, and for a writer of kind of in my level, which is, I don't want to be too self-deprecating, but I'm not like I'm not on the New York Times book bestseller list, right? And poetry really does get that. So, it's a really difficult sell. So you just have to keep trying because
yeah,
there are a lot of publishers out there that are looking for good writing, and
yeah,
they're not caught up in the whole capitalism of the publishing industry. Now they do have
yeah,
to make money, but they
yeah,
also they want to get books out there, and there still are a lot of readers. Um, Now a lot of the reading is around romance and sci-fi and young adult
yeah.
but so it's a tough sell these days. Publishing is difficult because everyone's watching movies and um, stuff like that. I don't know what to say on that. It's hard, but I think you need to keep going.
Yeah,
That's what you need
absolutely.
to just
Absolutely. Yeah,
because I
thank you.
think there's a market out there for good writing and
Yeah, yeah,
so I would say stick to it.
yeah.
Don't
That's
give up,
great.
and
Yeah, thank
eventually
you.
you might hit a brick wall, but give it a try.
Yeah, that's true. Thank you. Thanks for your advice. Sounds quite great to
Mhm.
me. And now, is there
Yeah.
anything you love to share with the viewers about your books that we did not mention in this interview and you'd love the viewers to know? And also, what sort of advice do you offer writers hoping to write and publish a memoir?
Well, uh, I'm not sure what kind of advice. I mean, I have reading over my book. I think the book that, my memoir is quite honest, but it's also very wordy. And
Hmm.
I ask readers to uh, parse fairly complicated prose. Maybe because I'm an academic, I don't know. But
Hmm.
I think that I would advise writers to tell their story with honesty and to not try to hide behind being. I think one of the things my publisher did is because a lot of what I was doing was uh, telling stories that weren't my story and
Yeah.
not looking into my own psychological. Because really, a memoir is a drama of psychology more than anything
Yeah.
else, right? It's
Yeah.
about looking into what you did, why you did it. So not so much like a adventure story. It could be, but it's more about the suffering that you go through and how you process it.
Hmm.
And there's a whole genre of kind of psychological novels
Hmm.
that, like Henry James. I know people don't read Henry James that much, but these people that like Proust, all
Absolutely.
interior. They're
Yeah.
thinking about how they're thinking, and they're dramatizing their phobias and all that stuff. And
Mm,
memoir requires you to. I think memoir really requires you to dramatize the self. If it's going to be good. So, it's confessional. It's like confessional poetry. It's like Sylvia Plath or whatever. But but
mm,
if you're going to write a memoir, you have to pony up to that looking inside yourself and explaining it.
wow. This is
Not
quite
easy.
amazing. It is not easy. It is not
I'd
easy.
rather write a novel. I'd rather write a novel or a poem.
It is not easy at all. Yeah,
Yeah,
it is not
yeah,
easy. And now, I don't know
yeah.
if you would like to read a short section of your book to the audience. Would you like to do that?
Well, what I did was my book at memoir actually has some poems in it, and so because I don't have a copy of the novel, I do have a
Yeah,
copy of one of the poems I put in the novel. So I thought maybe I could read the poem,
yeah,
which
yeah, you can do that too.
actually it occurs in the chapters on going to Kenya.
Oh, great
And
one.
so what happened was I got in touch with a nonprofit in Nairobi called TICA, Trust for Indigenous Cultures and Health,
Okay.
and they hooked me up with an HIV support group in one of the slums, not Kibera, but another slum that's almost as big, but not as big as that. And so this is the story of me going to an HIV support group in Korogocho, which is one of the big Nairobi slums. Anyway, so it's called Blood Work.
Mm,
That's the title. Um, Come to the slum, Kochi, Nairobi, scrap metal town, corrugated, red dirt. My nonprofit guides, positive people who peddle herbs and hope. Take me through mazes, how are yous from kids, sweet homes built from junk. This
mm,
visitor, numb with privilege, shocked smiler, driven from his hotel to see what he cannot feel. We wend our way through warrens, potholes, chickens in crates, charcoal cylinders, to Mary's place. Her
mm,
door, a dead car. Inside, white sheets cover walls, light the dark. She burns incense, translates stories from Swahili.
mm,
Six, six in our group. Ismail wants to find a lover now the drugs have kicked in. Saisa, wants me to marry, share her cabbage juice cocktail, tell the world we are proud to be alive with the virus.
Mm,
She's made her body map, wears her conga with a message. Only Yeti quiets banter. Below her lash, a tear appears. She calls her brother Deus, the only one who did not shun her.
mm,
Her sniffle brings us close, close enough to close the circle. It slides from duct to voice, speaks deeper than infection, sharper than stigma's sting. The way
mm,
they stare at you like death, at
mm,
Kochi, at home in America. Her tear immerses us, health workers, mothers, men who have sex with men, writer, intruder, who chokes on Asante Sanos. He took his pills this morning. He rode a taxi to the center. Has no right to tell their story. In silence they stand, chapped hands linked like T cells, blood work.
wow. Wow. I love this. It do read like a genre and also like a narrative poetry. I mean, poetry that you've written in form of telling a story. And as you keep reading from one line to another, it feels as if you're following a line of an action, of a curse, of what is going on somewhere at a
Yeah,
particular time. So it do reach to me like a genre, and also it sounds to me like a narrative poetry. So thank you for sharing.
yeah.
That's quite beautiful. That's quite
Okay, thanks.
narrative.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Thank
It
you.
was an amazing, amazing experience for me. Um,
Yeah,
and, and I was conflicted by it, of course, because I'm writing a poem about, I kind of like, I'm getting published based on this event
yeah,
I went to. I want to be
yeah,
sincere about just being there, but also,
absolutely. Yeah,
you know,
thank you. And just in case we have some viewers who are currently watching this interview, I would love to get a copy of your books. On what platform are they available on for purchase?
well, they're going to. It's going to be the book itself. It's going to be available, of course, on Amazon and on other Goodreads and all those places. But also, the press is called Running Wild in Los
Yeah.
Angeles, and they could
Oh,
go to their website, the Running Wild website, and order the book. They can order the book, of course, on Amazon, but people are rebelling against Amazon these days. But there are other because
that's
there's
true.
such a monopoly, and I
Yeah.
agree. But the audiobook is available on Audible right now, so you can go
Oh,
on Amazon and get to Audible, or if you have an Audible account, you can go on and download the vocal version of the book
yeah,
and listen to
audiobook.
it. Yeah, audiobook. Listen to it in your car or on your earphones or whatever. So yeah, so that's and then on May 6th,
Yeah.
there'll be paperbacks available for like $15.
Oh, great, great. And I left a link in the discussion part of this interview where interested viewers can get a copy of Cassie Shark's books directly on Amazon and also another platform. So thank you so much, Casey, for accepting the
Okay.
invitation to featured on P English Literature. It's awesome having this conversation with you.
Oh yeah, well, thank you, Peter. I appreciate having the opportunity to talk to you, and
Absolutely.
I hope all goes well with your writing as well.
Yeah.
I'm gonna look it up. I'm gonna look up your poetry and then I'll write you an email about
Yeah.
it.
Thank you.